Right. So, hello everyone. Welcome to Imprint IAS, and so let's start. So, first topic which we're going to cover in this video is culture and history. Right. So, let's try first look at the analysis that what is the weightage. So, culture is weighted 35 marks. Right, and there are a total of 3 questions, and they're very interesting questions, and something we'll talk about why they have been asked, right? So across time, in previous years, how culture has been doing. So from 20 to 40 in 2013 to 14, then from 14 to 15 again 40 marks, then 16 25 marks, then 17 25 marks, and now again 35 marks. So if you take in on average 30 marks, right, that's the weightage of culture. So I would say that it's really important as a topic, right? Okay. So in case you haven't prepared, please do a lot of answer writing in this, right? Okay, so the first question. There was a question in the UPSC prelims on Tavernier, right? And about Tavernier Blue, the diamond, right? In case you haven't seen that question, please do go through the prelim questions. So the question is, assess the importance of the accounts of Chinese and Arab travelers in the reconstruction of Indian history. So just to have a look, when somebody asks you about Chinese and Arab travelers, the first one I would think about is Yunxiang, because he was something of one of my favorites, right? And why he was my favorite, because of Harshvardhana. So Harsha was one of my favorite monarchs because of his a generosity during the Prayag festival. He used to give up everything, even the clothes he was wearing. Right. The other one I think a lot of you would remember is the song by of Nasruddin Shah, this Ibn Battuta, right? Right. But the idea behind the problem with Ibn Battuta is obviously he's not Chinese nor Arab, so he's from Morocco. So again, whether you consider him Arab, that's debatable, right? Then we have Abdul Razak. Again, he is from Samarkand. Okay, so again, whether he should be considered as an Arab traveler, that's again debatable, right? So typically, what's left is Al-Masudi, maybe, right? Okay, so but I think before even all that, let's understand, what do you mean by this line? Reconstruction of Indian history. So reconstruction of Indian history typically is done through coins and inscriptions. And maybe you might have even written a question on how coins and inscriptions help in reconstruction of Indian history. But the other, obviously material is the accounts by foreign travelers, and Megasthenes Indica is the beginning of that. But definitely you're not going to talk about. You can start with Megasthenes and Indica not being available in this question, and that might be a start to the question. But anyhow, so the idea is that we should answer this question from political, cultural, economic, social accounts of these travelers, and we should typically write the importance of understanding the perspective and understand they might have exaggerated, Yunxiang has exaggerated Harsha and Buddhism a lot, because obviously he's a Buddhist, right? So, and typically you can even talk about what places they visited, which cities they visited, if a map maybe can be drawn for that. Okay, so let's look at a rough answer. So apart from material remains, coins, inscriptions, literary sources, accounts by foreign travelers has been of immense importance in the reconstruction of history of India. And Yunxiang, Arab traveler Al-Masudi, Al-Biruni, Ibn Battuta have helped in these reconstructions in the following way. You can actually mention the reigns if you write. In which reign Fahin came to Chandragupta, to the Gupta period, though he didn't mention him at all in his accounts. Yunxiang came in Harsha's period and obviously wrote a lot about him. Al-Biruni came with Mahmud of Ghazni. Ibn Battuta was a judge in Tughlaq's time. Abdul Razak, obviously Vijayanagar Empire. Al-Masudi just visited Malabar coast, right, in 915 around AD. Then political conditions. So Fahin wrote about the Guptas and talked about that there was economic prosperity, right, and taxes were not too heavy, and it was the economy was liberal. So it talks about a lack of centralized economy, right, centralized administrative system. Hyun Seang obviously praised Harsha and his administration a lot, right? So that's there. Fine also talked about Ashoka's, palace, and he said that it looked as if it was not built by men but gods. Ibn Battuta gave us insight into the Korea system during Muhammad bin Tughlaq, the judicial system definitely because he was a judge himself. Abdul Razak typically gave us idea about the Vijayanagara Empire, right? So so that was it. Socially, obviously, public morality. He talks about Fahin talks about the fact that Indians were vegetarians. They did not use alcohol, etc. Maybe he was, going too extreme. But again, see, understand we have to take everything what they say with a pinch of salt. Hyun Seang obviously talked about the caste system was rigid. There was no parda system. Women were provided education, but there was practice of sati, and that was corroborated even by other accounts. Al-Biruni obviously talks about the Charul Varna system, right? And Kitabul Hind is maybe the first book, right? And I think is a rich source of Indian history. Ibn Battuta also talks about yogis who have practices and also, confirms the practice of sati, just like Hyun Seang. Fahin talks about that Hinduism and Buddhism were the popular religions of time, so we have an idea about the religious condition of that time. Right, in Mathura there were many Buddhist monasteries, etc. Hyun Seang talks about Brahmanism, Buddhism, Jainism as a popular religion. So we get an idea about how people, what kind of religion they are following, what kind of life they have, right, through these accounts. Economic conditions definitely. Fahin talks about how rich or poor was India, and Fahin talked about whether how progressive was India, does it do trade with other countries or not, right? Hyun Seang talked about best silk and best cotton, best wool came from, typically India, and India fruits and vegetables, he talked about those as well, and talked about the brisk trade with other countries. Ibn Battuta obviously talked about great trade taking place in Kolam and Calicut, where ships from China and Persia came. Abdul Razak obviously talked about the thriving ship trade during the 14th and 15th century. Right, so Hyun Seang again, positive favor, right? So historians do not accept travelers' description as entirely dependable because they have always been exaggeration and biasness towards the king. But obviously, at the end of the day, if enough sources say the same thing, we say that obviously that's true, and definitely these accounts are helpful in reconstruction of Indian history with a pinch of salt. So when I would end this of salt, right, we should accept their account with a pinch of salt. That's how would I end it. Okay, so that was the first question. Let's look at the second question from Indian culture, that is safeguarding the Indian heritage is the need of the moment. Comment. Now it's a very general question. Now it's difficult to handle this question if you think about it, but the Adarsh Samarak scheme for conservation of monuments is in the connection with the news, and I think that's the reason this has been asked. Very interesting. So that we have a question from current affairs, and they have made it into a history question. So that's kind of beautiful, I would say, in a lot of ways, right? So when you ask to comment, what does it mean? You have to pick the main points and give your opinion on them, on evidences and arguments. Obviously, you can talk about any present scheme or project. So a lot of projects have been accepted. 4 of them have been already accepted under the Adarsh Samarak scheme. But the idea is that maybe you can start with that, right? And then obviously talk about why you need to safeguard, obviously, right? So the art heritage of our nation is a vast continuum, evolving incessantly since time immemorial, and safeguarding this heritage is very important, right? So from Akbar, from Bhimbetka, right, from Ashoka, we need to preserve the art. It's very precious. It is the story of 5,000 years, amazing. And paintings and sculptures depict and typically preserve our social life and culture. Second, so Wali painting, the centered around the concept of Mother Nature and elements of nature, and farming is the main way of life and large source of food for life, and they greatly respect nature and wildlife. So again, Wali painting is something that obviously should be considered an intangible art. Art heritage typically is a living example of a contact with outside worlds. Like take the example of Gandhara art. It depicts Greco-Roman features. It's also an important source of reconstruction. So think about Mohenjo-daro, right, and the great bearded torso which has been found in Mohenjo-daro. So great bath talks about ritual bath, bathing. So it also tells you about what our history was. The Pashupati seal again, right? So it's a continuation of our culture, customs, rituals. So obviously it should be safeguarded. In this, I think you can give a lot of examples. So, give examples of World Heritage Sites. Right. So obviously Rani Ke Vav and Khajuraho temples. Right. You can mention a lot. All right. I think 25 sites have been selected under the scheme. And 4 have been handed over to private players for maintenance, etc. So you can actually talk about those. Let's look at the next question, which is, I think, the most difficult one. Right. So this is the most difficult question. So most difficult. Right. So why do you say it's the most difficult question? So obviously because the NCERT only gives a brief account, and you have to explain how the Bhakti movement was before Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and how it was reoriented in the next phase, in the next paragraph. And discuss carefully selected evidence to make a case for and against for the argument, and point out the advantages and disadvantages giving the context. So this is what you're supposed to do. The problem is obviously you will have a lot less material for this than maybe for other, and it's a 15-mark question, so it's difficult to answer this. So let's look at the answer. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, a Hindu mystic, saint in the 16th century, his advent of marked importance or resurgence of the Bhakti movement. He popularized the degenerated Radha Krishna cult and externalized the movement through Sankirtana, collective worship, and recitation. He also gave japa, so he gave importance to that as well. He laid great emphasis on kirtans, and his opinion, true worship of God depended on love, devotion, music, and dance. And he gave a philosophy which gave elements of both Advaita and Dvaita, and Achinta, Bheda, Abheda, basically. The idea is that the living soul, right? So the living soul is intrinsically linked with the Supreme Lord, and yet at the same time is not the same as the Lord. So that's the idea. Okay. Then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also popularized the chanting of Hare Krishna mantra and composed the Sikh system, the 8 devotional prayers in Sanskrit. As I've already talked about, he stressed the importance of singing and chanting the names of God. Obviously, Dalits of that time neglected and were the unprivileged caste, and they readily accepted the libertarian outlook and obviously Dr. Mahaprabhu. So he basically, obviously focused on these, right, especially in Bengal. Chaitanya was also a very strong critic of Brahmanical methods of worship. In his opinion, such complicated and complex religious practices such as the Brahmins observed led only to violence. And such practices not only encouraged exploitation, they boosted the false vanity of Brahmins. So in some ways, right, so he did, typically was a very strong critic, and this I think makes him very different from other Bhakti saints. Chaitanya preaching created a new awakening in the religious ferment of India. It typically mesmerized the people with a divine sense of love, right? And Bengal, Odisha, Vrindavan were counted as the main center of Vaishnavism, and his personality, preaching of love, endeared him to the people of all parts of it. Okay, let's stop here, right? We'll be going into the next next questions in another video, right? So do like our channel, right, and go through our website imprint.ias, and do subscribe our channel, right, if you like this video. If you have any comments, how can we make the video better, more interactive, right, so please do comment. Thank you so much.